while it's fresh on my mind, let's talk about a recent Substack piece that I loved,
Okay.
the ideologues of GMU. And so the message of this, the message of this Substack is basically, the other academics, they're failing. They're failing in a very deep way. It's not that they're just missing the truth, like they have a disagreement with you on some technical issue. It's like the way they approach their careers has something deeply wrong with it. Can you just talk about that a little bit and like why you are different than them?
Well, let's see. I mean, if you just think about the way that the typical academic works, they are careerists first. There's a hierarchy that exists. They hear about who are the people that are on top. And then you just try to find out, well, what do I have to write in order to end up at that position? It is a very difficult a hierarchy to ascend. You're talking about people with tremendous IQs and work ethics. The problem, I say, is that they really aren't all that interested in saying something important. It's much more about just, especially in economics, writing pieces that are bulletproof, even if they aren't very important. Economists love the idea of, look, we have ironclad causal inference here. You cannot question the causation. All right, well, maybe that's right, and maybe you worked on it for 5 years in order to get that level of certainty. But what if the question isn't very important? Or what if the result just doesn't plausibly generalize to anything else that anyone cares about? Isn't it really just the labor theory of value to say that because I worked on it for 5 years and you have to be really smart to do this kind of work, therefore it's valuable? That is a lot of my critique of what, especially economists do. Like other fields, we know there are some fields where you really actually can do very well without even working that hard if you've got the right connections. We got the grievance study scandal, which I think did give us an idea about there are fields where it isn't even the labor theory of value that governs, but the social sciences that are higher status. There is a genuine hierarchy. It's not easy to ascend the hierarchy, but that doesn't mean that what they're producing is worthwhile.
It's an emotional labor theory of value. They put the emotional work in, and then they have to respect that.
Yeah. Yes, although maybe it's an interesting question as to what their rubric really is, what it takes. Obviously, like if you or I just wanted to become the number one woke academic, it would be hard to do. We could put everything we've got into that goal and still fail completely. It's not just like it's wolves among the sheep. They've got their own evolutionary ecosystem set out. So it's even there, like you really have to step back and understand, well, how do you get to the top of this thing? It can't be easy, although it's confusing as to what skills the people at the top do have.
Yeah. I'm amazed. When I read your stuff, it's like, it's so often I'll read this. I'm like, I was going to write this exact same. It was the exact point. We are so in accord. So when you say labor theory of value in academia, I had literally the exact same thought. I thought about writing this at one point. It was in the context of trusting the experts, right? This person has a PhD, Joe Biden has a PhD or whatever they call the PhD in education. She must know more about fixing the schools than, Elon Musk would or somebody like that. It really is somebody did the work. Therefore, we have to, respect it. It's and you're right that's the way academics think about this, and it's right. I think obviously it's true that they're probably going to be careerists, and most people are careerists. But why does being a careerist take this form? Why is the hierarchy based on this rather than like having the most awesome and revolutionary and important ideas, which is maybe naively you would think academia should be about?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think the answer is that most human personalities just do not like that kind of thing. It's the kind of thing that is repellent to most people. Most people are looking for a safer, surer path, and to keep people from overstepping the limits of what's acceptable. So, again, it is hard to really nail it down as to quite what it is. But the main thing that I notice is that sometimes I'll talk to other academics and I'll say, like, this guy, like Robin Hanson, he's just a genius. And I've had academics say, well, I don't see what that matters. Like, it does not matter that he's a genius. It's so important to be a genius. And yet, this attitude is actually fairly common. It's not that important to be a genius. What really matters is that you just hunker down and do really solid work. I guess the main way that I would try to understand is just to say, even the most nominally revolutionary hierarchies in the world actually become quite inbred and stagnant in a short amount of time. So, the Bolshevik Party, they have a couple of years of weird stuff going on with this free love, and then pretty soon they get rid of all that stuff, and they no, we're just going to have communist rule, and things are going to be orderly. And then before you know it, there's a really strict doctrine that everyone has to hold. And even though they start off saying they're revolutionaries and want to burn the whole world down and build it anew, pretty soon they're some of the most cautious people in the world in a certain strange sense. So I would say that this really is pretty much a human universal, that whenever you have a intellectual group, that even if they start off officially committed to being very curious, normally this much deeper human urge for conformity takes over. So yeah, I guess that if I had to really stick my neck out and say what's going on, I would just say that the human desire for conformity is very high, which means that it's just hard to assign too much status to revolutionary thinking because it's not conformist.
Yeah, I mean the conformist thing is really is really something there. I was listening. I don't know if you listened to the same podcast. I don't remember the guy's name, but Tyler was interviewing on Conversation with Tyler some expert on the FDA. I think he was at Harvard. I forget the guy's name. But Tyler would point out something like, "Oh, this guy, the FDA did X, and like X, clearly, like delaying the vaccine by a set amount, and that probably, it killed a lot of people. Like, what do you think about this, guy who's expert on FDA?" And it was a fascinating conversation because the guy, I just noticed Tyler would do this again and again, and the guy would always sort of twist things to make what the FDA was doing sound reasonable, and like it was, whatever the decision was, he was always trying to, find the best possible light in which to, and it wasn't like a steel man, exercise. It was more like, well, the FDA did it. So like, even though you can show me like this cost 100,000 lives, like they could have done another way, and you could have got 100,000 deaths. It's like a psychological theory. Like you would have increased, distrust in the vaccine, and like maybe that's true on the margins, but like to say that when you have like a certainty that caused hundreds of thousands of deaths, to assume that like it would have been balanced if they did the other thing, I don't know why you would do that. But it just seemed like, he really wanted to defend the FDA, and he really had a bias towards saying, whatever the FDA is doing must be right or rational. And I think that's common. That is a psychological quirk that I think most normal people have.
Which is hilarious because that's one of my running arguments with Tyler, that I accuse him of doing that. Not specifically with the FDA, but just rationalizing bad things the government does and saying, well, you have to understand that it's much more complex than you realize. Like, I don't think it's that complex. I think that they're just bad.
Yeah. Well, what was say that again? Who did you say was doing that?
Tyler. So like at lunch with Tyler, so many lunches involve me saying there's some terrible thing government's doing, and he's saying, well, it actually really makes sense if you appreciate all the complexities as I do.
I got it. So there's a spectrum. So this FDA guy, there's a spectrum. Yeah. So like Tyler's in the middle between that guy at Harvard and you.
Well, Tyler's very good on the FDA specifically. There's other issues where I think he's much more forgiving of very bad stuff government does.
Yeah, I remember there was I had professors like this at the University of Chicago Law School, and they would take some development in the law, and then they would like work backgrounds and find out why it was rational. And sometimes the argument made sense, and often the argument just didn't make sense. It seemed like an intellectual, like you could, if you were motivated to, you could do the math in a way that makes everything. I guess it really depends a lot on what your priors are. What are these sort of mechanisms for a government or an institution getting things correctly?
Yes, I mean, something that I'm often tempted to ask academics is just like, are you a lawyer for whatever group you're talking about? And I know they're not, but there is this strange lawyerly mentality that many academics have, where they know what side they like, and then they argue in a lawyerly way. Well, the lawyer's job is not to say, "Oh yeah, fine, my client's guilty of sin." It's to keep trying to go and come up with some story where what their client's doing is actually okay, despite the fact that it seems totally indefensible to any neutral person.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the other thing you do in this article, which I think is cool, this is sort of your, this is part of your, it's not just the argument itself, it's your public persona. I mean, you say at the end something like, let's see what you say. You say something like, in 30 years, they'll be reading my books and they won't be reading any of you, you professors publishing in the top journals. I like it. I mean, do you, but that's not how academics usually talk. I guess what I'm wondering about is like, do you think that like, is it a thing where like you think sort of you have to you have to sort of have sharp elbows to sort of get the point across, because there's no way polite, there's maybe a polite way of saying these people are doing worthless work and I'm doing work that's worthwhile. And I think it's great that, people are, you think you're doing work that's worthwhile. I think it's great that you're taking it seriously. But it really was sort of like a more frontal attack than most people are comfortable with. How do you think about, sort of just writing like that?
Well, if you go and read the immediate follow-up, this is where I say, I sincerely mean this in the friendliest possible way. And if
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you
Sure,
want to
sure.
talk about how to redirect, chart a new course in your career, I would really love to help. And I have actually had some academics take me up on that and email me and say, yeah, well, what can I do? Oh yeah, you convinced me. Right? And yeah, like I'm not there with Schadenfreude just saying, oh, well, so finally you admit the truth. Haha. I can appreciate they've got themselves painted into a corner and they want to get out, and I do want to help. So like honestly, like the advice that whenever people ask me if you could go back in time and give any advice to your teenage self, my advice is always just be friendlier to people. So even in this piece, I would say that I was not trying to be unfriendly to anyone. I was making I will say a good humored comment on my sense of self-satisfaction and really saying, look, if you want to have that same sense, I think you need to go and chart in your course. I mean, honestly, like I'm never trying to make people feel bad about themselves. It's just not.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm just trying to, So, I mean, like honestly, as I was writing that, I was like laughing to myself, and go, all right, this is very funny, but. uh, So that was it's true, but also funny because it's true, as Homer Simpson says.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I don't think you're trying to make people feel bad, and you say you're, your best of intentions, and I know that's, I'm sure that's true. It's just most people perceiving this would say, like it's like different subcultures, different fields, they have different norms. Like the tone of like your essay, if it was like, if you were in a group of, I don't know, like factory workers or something, it probably would be like just seen as like, normal criticism. Academia though, I mean, it seems to be attract a lot of people who are, unusually sensitive to criticism. And this is why I think academics tend not to write like this, right? So there's a connection
Mhm.
between sort of the stylistic. I think there's a connection between the stylistic sort of preferences and the more intellectual sort of search for truth. I think the fact that you have like sort of a high standard of what you consider something that hurts somebody's feelings makes you better at finding truth. While somebody who has just as like a hypersensitivity that, like, if you slightly criticize their work, they're gonna break down. That person's not gonna ever arrive at truth, because you need this sort of conflict. You need this adversarial process where you see what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I also say that the fields that I know best, economics and philosophy, are ones where I think that people's skins just are not that thin. In economics, I know better, but philosophers also, like when I've interacted with them, there is a great focus on is the argument true or not, rather than, well, how can you say such a thing about my beautiful argument? You've hurt my feelings. Obviously, there's also just a self-selection. The people that are the individual economists or philosophers that I deal with probably also have thicker skin. I will say that there's probably a difference in person versus in writing. In person, like I'm almost always really happy to be talking to whoever I'm talking to, and it's hard for them to really have their feelings hurt when the person obviously is having a great time chatting with them. And again, like I don't think I would come off as sadistic or anything like that. But when it's in writing, then it's a little bit harder because the person doesn't, especially if the person doesn't know you, then what tone do they ascribe to you when you say something like that? Um, you I just, I will say, I always focus first and foremost on being correctly understood and expressing myself clearly. And then secondary, once I feel like that's very hard for someone to miss, then try to market in a way that's more appealing. But yeah, like my trade-off is almost is really very strongly like being correctly understood is most important. And then marketing, it can only be something that you add on top of that without changing the meaning. Because otherwise, yes, you're making friends, but you're actually pushing things that are wrong. So what's the point of that?